Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to go through my top 10 books of 2023. So it seems a little late to be coming out with this video because we are in February and I think a lot of people have already done it, but I do only post twice a week and I came out with this as soon as I could, but I wanted to go ahead and save the best for last. So here we are. I do have my top 10. I do have a few honorable mentions that I want to go through as well with you. I did put these in order a little bit. Obviously, this could always shift, but I'm going to go ahead and start with my least favorite and then move my way up to my absolute favorites of the year. But first, let's get into the 4 honorable mentions that I would like to talk about. The first one we have is We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian, and this is a queer historical romance in which we are following Andy and Nick. Nick is a reporter for a Brooklyn newspaper, and Andy is the one who is one day going to inherit this newspaper from his father, despite not being overly interested in this job. To somewhat familiarize himself with this business, Andy starts working at the newspaper, and it is very clear that he's not very good at his job. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He is a bit of a klutz, and he might be doing this a little bit on purpose to kind of try and prove to his father that this isn't where he's supposed to be. Unfortunately for him, Nick has taken it upon himself to help Andy, and so the two of them start actually becoming friends as they are working together. And obviously, eventually this friendship develops into more. This is a book that had me laughing from page 1. I listened to the audiobook of this and I highly suggest you do so as well. There was great humor throughout this story. I really enjoyed the gradual building of their relationship. It very much was a friends to lovers situation. Andy himself was learning a lot about his queer identity throughout this story, and Nick, on the other hand, knew very much that he was queer, but he also knew that the 1950s are not a good time to be a queer man, and so he was very nervous about starting a serious relationship. I think that this story did a wonderful job, not just building this relationship, but also balancing the fear that comes with being a queer person during this time in history, while also showing the joy that the queer community can find when they come together in safe spaces. So if you're looking for a queer historical story, I 10 out of 10 would recommend this one. Up next, we have Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle, and this is a adult horror story that really stuck with me. I think one of the reasons it didn't quite make it onto the favorites list is because despite it being an adult story, I did think it was slightly YA at times. I think our character that we're following is maybe 19 or 20, so I would push it maybe more into that new adult realm. In this book, we are following a young woman whose name I unfortunately don't remember, which is not unusual for me. And she is living in a very religious community, and everything seems to be going totally fine until one day she starts to see this creepy woman smiling at her and following her around, and all of a sudden she is also starting to cough up flies, and she's not really sure what this means, but it seems like it might have to do with Camp Damascus, a queer conversion camp that is set in the backyard of her community. I had such a physical response to this story. I will say that you have to have a healthy dose of fear to not just the concept of conversion therapy, but also to religion in general. And I myself am a bit fearful of the concept of religion. I have a lot of respect for people who use religion in the right way and a lot of fear for people who don't use it in the right way. And I think that this story was just well written for someone with the fears that I hold. I think that it did a really great job showing how harmful to families and individuals, especially young individuals, homophobia in the religious community can be. For me personally, I thought that the first half of the story was a lot stronger, but I do think that the ending was incredibly satisfying. I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I really went into this book knowing just about nothing, and the synopsis of this book really doesn't tell you much either, so I really want to stay as vague as possible. But there were just a lot of themes within this story, like religious trauma, homophobia, finding kind of your place in the world, fighting for your place in this world. I do also like the fact that the author included a character who, because of this, decided to move away from religion, while also following a side character who, despite all of this trauma, decided to stay with religion and decided to interpret the scripture in a different, more accepting and loving way, which I think really also shows how easy it is to just kind of twist religion into whatever you want it to be, whatever helps you push your own agenda. So excellent book. Once again, I listened to the audiobook and would highly suggest that. I know I saw this book on quite a few favorites lists, so it's definitely a horror that is worth checking out. The third honorable mention is going to be House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland, and this is a YA horror story in which we are following Iris, who is the youngest of three sisters. A few years ago, these three sisters disappeared into thin air from right in front of their parents. And when they reappeared, they had these kind of crescent-like scars on them, and they seemed to be slightly different than before. While their mother was very ecstatic to have her daughters back, their father seemed convinced that his daughters were gone and something had returned in their place. Years after their return, their father has passed away by suicide, and Iris's sisters have left the house to escape the overprotectiveness of their mother, leaving Iris to bear that burden alone. However, one day, one of her sisters, who is usually in the limelight because of her beauty, seems to disappear. And so the sisters set off again to kind of try and figure out if whatever had taken them in the past is coming back for them. This story was very beautifully written. It definitely had queerness within it as well. One of the sisters was a lesbian and our main character is a bisexual. I really enjoyed the sisterly relationship that was presented throughout this story. It was just really beautifully written. I thought that the story was haunting. It was beautiful yet creepy at the same time. It had just the right amount of magic sprinkled into it. I myself am a big fan of nature horror, and that was definitely present in this story. Once again, an audiobook that I listened to, and I really enjoyed the author's accent in this. And the final honorable mention is the only nonfiction book that is on this list, and that is Evicted by Matthew Desmond. And this is a story that follows multiple renters as well as landlords within Milwaukee. This is an incredibly poor area, and we kind of see the harsh reality of the rental situations, how landlords work in a way that is not beneficial to those who are renting their property. We also very much see how once you're at the bottom, it is very hard to get out of it. I thought that this story was very difficult to read at times. There are definitely certain stories in here where you can't help but have your heart bleeding for these real people, especially since I am very aware that there is a very high homeless population here in America. Washington is relatively liberal, which means we also have a relatively high homeless population, because I think a lot of people who are homeless come here because they receive better benefits than in other states. And just knowing while you're reading this that there are actually people living these situations in that very moment is very difficult. I think it was a very impactful read. It's something that I think about very often. I think that the author did a really good job of kind of trying to show us the entire system. He tried to show us things from the renter's point of view, the landlord's point of view, as well as discussing police involvement and court involvement when it comes to evictions, because evictions are the main concept of this story. What leads to someone's eviction, and how is the system set up in such a way that eviction is the most likely outcome for these people. So I think that if you're at all interested in that topic, or any sort of topics that just kind of show how systems in the United States are set up to work against lower income people, or even disabled people, or people with children, or people with drug addictions, things like that, then you would definitely want to check out this book. All right, so now we're actually going to get into my top 10 books of the year, and the first one is going to be A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a retelling of the story of Dracula and his concubines, I guess we'll call them, and we are specifically following from the point of view of Constanta, his first wife, at least in the story, and she is kind of writing letters to Dracula explaining why in the end she had to kill him. This book focuses heavily on abusive relationships. The story starts out very much with psychological abuse and control, but it does start to descend into worse situations where at times physical abuse is included. So just trigger warnings for you before getting into this book. This book has incredibly beautiful writing. Anyone who reads this will probably tell you that. I did annotate this book. It's not something I do very often, but I knew I had to do it going into this book just by how often people are talking about how exquisite the writing is, and it truly is. I really enjoyed the historical backdrop to the story. Hundreds of years passed throughout this story. Our character experienced hundreds of years of abuse, and you just have to have a lot of respect for her when she finally stands up and is just like, okay, enough is enough. I really enjoyed the polyamorous aspect of it. Her relationship with his other two, wife and husband, was excellently done. All the characters were incredibly different, but all three of them worked together perfectly. And I feel like the story kind of shows that sometimes you don't really realize that you are being abused until you see someone in a similar situation as you, and then you're like, oh crap, this isn't good or anything like that. I thought Constanta's character development was very interesting. She was always someone who was trying to save people, specifically save women from abusive relationships. From the moment that she was born, she had a lot of anger towards hurtful men. So you're always like, well, don't you see that you're with a hateful man? But it very much showed that she had blinders to the situation, that she saw Dracula as nothing more than a savior and someone who she loved desperately. desperately. So beautifully told story. I think that it did a really good job of representing abusive relationships and how blind people can be in them and how difficult it can be to leave once you decide that's what you want to do. Speaking of abusive relationships, the next book on this list is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. In this book, we are following Alexis and Daniel. It is a contemporary romance, and Alexis is a doctor and a part of a very prestigious family who has been working at this hospital for generations. And when her older brother decides he's going to take a different path in life, she is kind of forced to continue that family tradition, whether she wants to or not. While she is trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life, she is also in the middle of leaving a abusive relationship with a man that her family really likes, but who mentally abused her for the majority of their relationship. However, because he never physically abused her, a lot of people, including her family, are just not really taking her serious. Luckily, she has some friends on her side, and after her car breaks down, she meets Daniel in a small town, and Daniel and the small town become an escape for her. I think that a lot of people love this book very much. There's something about it that just pulls you in. I don't know if it's just because most people, when they're reading a romance, enjoy just a little bit of heartbreak to go along with it, and the story was definitely sad to read. Alexis did not have the support of her family when she needed it, and that's always difficult to read about. But luckily, she had Daniel, and Daniel was perfection. He absolutely adored her from the very moment that he met. He was always a safe space. He was always supportive of her no matter what she decided. He kind of made her the center of her universe and gave her the strength and confidence to do what she needed to do to heal. I also really enjoyed the small town setting in the story. It had almost like a sprinkle of magic in it, where the town was almost wanting her to stay. It didn't want her to leave. If she was leaving, maybe a snowstorm would come, so she would have to stay. And the people of the town were just wonderful to her and very supportive of the relationship, and just made an interesting background story as well. This book does have an age gap in where the woman is actually older than the man, and obviously these two come from very different worlds, him coming from a small town and her coming from a very wealthy family, but put those two together and they are just the perfect couple that you can't help but root for. Book number 9 on this list is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and this is another contemporary romance. And in this book, we are following April and Marcus. Marcus is on a show called Gods of the Gates, and this is a very popular TV series, and there is a lot of fan fiction that goes around this story. And one of the people that writes fan fiction for this is April. She also enjoys cosplaying for this show. One day when she shows a picture of her cosplaying as one of the female characters, she gets a lot of hate on the internet because she is fat, and someone actually tags Marcus and kind of wants him to jump on the bandwagon for hating on her, and he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. In fact, I'm gonna ask her out on a date. And so the two of them actually end up on a date, and he realizes that she is a fanfiction writer, which he actually is as well, which he should not be doing. He should not be writing about the show, especially because he does not like what the directors are doing with the show, and he makes that very obvious in his fan fictions. And if anyone in Hollywood found out that he was doing that, he would probably be like kicked out. Like no one, no director wants to work with an actor who is talking shit about them behind their back. However, April and Marcus just have this wonderful connection, and what may start as kind of fake dating definitely turns into real dating very quickly. I think that this story did a wonderful job talking about how the world negatively impacts people who are not the way people want them to be. In April's case, she is fat and a lot of people look down on her because of that. And in Marcus's case, he is dyslexic and he has spent his entire life being told that he is lazy because of him struggling in school because of this. I think that both of these things were really well handled. I am not own voices, but I do think that watching these two find a safe space with each other as well as with their friends and other cast members, and just watching their confidence grow throughout this story was really wonderful to watch. I really enjoyed the fan fiction aspects. It would sometimes read out sections of fan fiction throughout the story, and that was very entertaining, and so was the cast group chat. That is something I enjoyed as well. Brought a lot of humor to the story. The story was just really warm-hearted and humorous throughout the entirety of it, and of course it was sexy on top of all of that. Book number 7 on this list is going to be Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, and this is a historical story set in the 1970s. We are following a Chinese American family after the death of their favorite daughter. One day, their favorite daughter, the middle child, is found drowned in a lake near their home, and we are just kind of flashing forward to when she was alive, and then after her passing, to kind of figure out how we got to this point, as well as how the family handles her death. This story has a slight mystery aspect of it because you don't really know, is she there because someone killed her? Was it an accident? Did she commit suicide? How did she end up in this lake? Why was she there? And how did she end up drowning? The story focuses very heavily on the pressure that parents put on children to fulfill their dreams that they were never able to fulfill themselves. This middle child, for some reason, became their parents' primary focus. For some reason, her parents were convinced that she was the one that was going to do everything that they were never able to do. Her father, a Chinese man, wanted her to be popular and accepted by her schoolmates despite being half Asian, and there obviously being racism at this time in history. Her mother, who wanted to be a academic, or at least to be academically inclined, but eventually became a housewife, wanted her daughter to succeed at school and go to university and have a prosperous career. Throughout the story, we get to follow multiple points of view. We follow the young daughter who has passed away. We follow her other brother, a little bit of her younger, neglected, forgotten sister, as well as the parents. I feel like the story is very much a character study. It very much focuses on a dysfunctional family. The family doesn't seem that dysfunctional because everyone seems to know their place. But at the same time, after this young girl's death, we realize how unstable that situation is, and we watch everything kind of fall apart. I really enjoyed the characters throughout this. I'm not saying they are the most likable. They are definitely flawed, and you can definitely see how their flaws contribute to the death of this young woman. I thought especially the sibling relationship between Lydia, the girl who dies, and her older brother was very interesting. He very much seemed like everyone else to orbit around her, but he also kind of resented the fact that she got so much more attention from their parents, and Lydia very much saw him as a safe space, but as his resentment grew, she started to lose that safe space, which I think was very detrimental to her mental health. I will say the ending of the story definitely broke my heart. It was very hard to read, but I definitely just think that this story had everything that I wanted a story like this to have. All the relationships were really well done throughout the story, and I just thought that the writing was also very beautiful. So it's a relatively short and quick read, but it definitely packs a punch. Before I get into book number 5, I hope that this video isn't too choppy. If I sound kind of like nasally or stuffy at any point, it is because for some reason, as soon as I started filming this video, my nose started getting all stuffy and I started getting sneezy. Bad timing, but I'm trying to work around it as best as I can. That being said, book number 5 is going to be The Push by Ashley Audren, and this is I would consider it, I guess, a psychological thriller revolving around the concept of motherhood, as well as possibly hinting at like postpartum depression and the issues that come with gaslighting women, especially when it comes to them bringing forward concerns revolving around their children. In this book, we are following Blythe, and she is married to a wonderful man and is very excited to be a mother. However, as soon as her daughter is born, she seems to really struggle to connect to this child, a problem that her husband is not having at all, which is causing strains in their relationship because he doesn't understand how she as a mother is not instantly in love with or connecting and adoring their child. We watch throughout this story as she struggles to connect with her daughter, and one day she actually has another child, a young son, and she has that connection instantly, which leaves her wondering if there is a problem with her or if there is a problem with her daughter. This was one of those books that I just didn't want to put down. I think I was very much in a reading slump when I picked this up. In fact, I think right before I picked this up, I had DNF'd the book. So this book very much pulled me out of the darkness. I really enjoyed the, I want to say, almost insidiousness of this story. The entire time you were reading it, you just felt a little off. You felt like there was something bad just around the corner, and so it really kept you reading because you're like, what the heck is going on? You know, is there something wrong with this mother? Is she suffering from postpartum depression and is not getting the care that she needs and is negatively impacting her marriage and her ability to mother this child? Is there something else going on? Is she having some sort of psychological break? Or is there something wrong with this child? Because it seems like there are a few other situations where people are kind of giving this child the side eye, like, you should keep an eye on her. I feel like at times this book was incredibly frustrating, especially when it came to the gaslighting situation. This husband did not believe his wife whatsoever, and it was very frustrating because he had been such a loving and adoring husband before, but I think it really shows that people just expect women to have this motherly intuition and for it to just click in right away when they have a child and that they will love this child no matter what, and it just isn't within the realm of possibility for them to realize that something might be wrong with the child. And I think a lot of parents really struggle to admit that there's anything that could potentially be wrong with their child. Hence, there has to be something wrong with the person who's questioning if their child may be having some psychopathic problems. I really enjoyed the back and forth throughout this story because I feel like our narrator isn't the most reliable, so you never quite know if there is something wrong because for the most part, she's the only one who has problems with this child. And so I think that the author did a really good job of making you kind of question like what is what, and the story made me cry. I think it does also deal with grief really well. I'm not going to tell you what kind of grief or anything, but I think that it was expressed in a very ugly and realistic manner, and overall I just thought that the ending was absolutely perfect. Book number 6 is Soul Eater by Lily Mayne, and this is the first book in the Monstrous series. This is a series following different male-male relationships between humans and monsters. It is set in a post-apocalyptic America. About 20 years ago, a rift formed between our world and the world that these monsters came from. The monsters came sweeping through the rift. They were like free real estate, and the military's response was to absolutely annihilate these monsters, which in turn ended up annihilating the majority of America in turn. Nowadays, we are living in an America where most people are living in overcrowded cities that are suffering heavily from poverty. We also have large military bases. The military is very much in control at this time as they continue to try and wipe out all of these monsters. And then we also have the raiders who are living out in the wastelands, which are lands that were kind of taken over by the monsters. In this first book, we are following Danny and Wynn, the Soul Eater. The Soul Eater is a very powerful monster that shows up every few years, kills a crap ton of people, and then pieces out again. And one day when he's out doing his rounds, the military is like, all right, we're gonna get him this time. So they send a bunch of low-level soldiers to kind of distract him. In other words, be cannon fodder while they try to capture Wynn. Danny is one of those soldiers who's being used as cannon fodder. He does not want to be there. It's his first year in the military. He kind of joined the military out of desperation after his mother passed away, and as he's watching all of these people get slaughtered around him, he kind of just like blacks out. He's like, I don't know what's happening, I'm just gonna stand here. And Wynn seems to realize that he's not fighting and approaches him. However, as he's distracted by Danny, the military is able to capture him. Throughout this story, we kind of see that Wynn has a very strong interest in Danny. When he's at the military base, there's no one he will talk to but Danny. When it's time to escape, he's killing everyone, but he's taking Danny with him. And we then get to follow the two of them as they continue Wynn's journey around the wastes as he's killing all these people, but maybe he's killing them for a reason. Obviously, this is a monster romance, so the two of them start to form a relationship throughout this story. I really enjoyed the dynamic of this couple. I think it's very similar to the dynamic in Gloam, book 4 in this series, which I'm currently reading, and I'm finding I'm really enjoying it more than the other two books. And that is where we have this monster. They're tough, they're strong, they're gonna kill people that need to be killed. And then we have their little human companion who's like, I'm really innocent and I don't want to kill anyone and I'm a really good person. And despite the fact that you have killed people and are really tough and really scary, I feel really safe with you and I really care about you. And I just really enjoy that dynamic. I will say that I read the novella for these two, absolutely love that as well. They are at this point still my favorite couple. I think that the author did a good job of getting just the right amount of world building in here. It is a series, so we continue to learn more and more and the story expands. I've been having a really great time with this series. I think that the smut is 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed it in this book as well as the others, but this one was my favorite due to some interesting anatomy when it comes to Soul Eater or Wynn, and I just thought that their relationship was absolutely perfect. And if you're looking for a good monster romance or even just a good male-male romance, I definitely suggest checking out this series. Book number 7 is going to be The Broken Kingdoms, which is the second book in the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It is not this entire book. This is is the bind up. The Broken Kingdoms is right there in between those two little tabbies, and I absolutely love this story. Now, I waited a very long time to read this after reading book one. I want to say that I read this in, did I read it in November or something crazy like that? But I read the first book in December of 2022, so I definitely waited way too long. Despite that, I didn't feel lost or anything. I would say it's more of a companion novel than a direct continuation. We are following different characters, and it is also taking place about 10 years after the last chapter of book one. In this book, we are following a young woman who is actually blind, but she is able to see magic. It's kind of like a light source in the darkness, and she also interacts a lot with godlings, which is not super uncommon, but also considering her status in society is definitely something worth talking about. One day it seems like someone is able to kill these godlings, despite the fact that no one's really supposed to be able to do that, and she, as well as some of her godling friends, get thrown into the mayhem that occurs afterwards. I think N.K. Jemisin is really talented at world building. I think that her world building for me is really easy to understand. I think some people might be nervous to read her stuff just because you hear how confusing the Broken Earth trilogy is. I have not read that trilogy yet, but I will say at least the work that I have read so far has been really comprehensive to me, and I'm not a huge high fantasy reader or anything like that, but I just think that she builds these worlds really beautifully. They're complex yet definitely digestible. I also really enjoy her characters. I think that they are really well fleshed out and that all their relationships are really interesting. This story definitely had a very intriguing theme of what is it like to be a god among your mortals, and your mortals don't know you're that god, and they are acting in your name, and you're not able to tell them that you would not approve of their behavior, that they seem not to really understand you, that they seem to just be using you to further their own agenda. I also thought that the story was rather heartbreaking. It had a lot of sad moments in it. Our character definitely went through a lot, and I think that the ending of the story was very bittersweet. It had me crying. Yes, I did cry at the end of this book. I think that is just one of those stories that will really stick with you. I think that the pacing of the story was really well done, and also that reading the story was also a rather unique experience. All right, guys, we are getting into the top 3 of the year. I'm a little bit nervous. The next 2 are last books in trilogies. So I will be talking more probably about earlier in the book so we don't get too much into a spoiler territory, but the first book is going to be The Hourglass Throne by Katie Edwards, and the first book of this is called The Last Sun. I did reread book 1 and 2 so that I could read this book for the first time. This is a urban fantasy, and we are following a world that used to be Atlantis, but Atlantis was destroyed. Once humans found out about it, they were just like, oh, we gotta destroy that because we're humans and we destroy things. And obviously Atlantis was able to hold their own and ended up kind of creating new Atlantis. So they took this land, they said, this is ours now, and they lifted a bunch of buildings from all over the world and brought it and made the city, and the world was kind of like, okay, they can just transport buildings, so we're just gonna let them be. We're not gonna mess with them anymore. What they don't know, and what the Atlanteans don't want people to know, is that their power is waning. These powerful beings are based off of the tarot cards. In this book, our main character, Rune, used to belong to the Sun Throne, but about 20 or so years ago, his throne was destroyed. His family was killed, all those that were protected or part of his court were killed, and he himself had a very traumatic experience on that night as well. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, specifically kind of like a gang rape kind of situation. The author does slightly go into detail throughout these books of what happened to him on that night, and it is brutal, to be honest. At this point, Rune and his companion Brand are the only two members of his court. Brand, as a companion, is very much magically tied to Rune. The two of them were plopped in a cradle together, and their family said, yep, Brand, you're gonna protect Rune from this day forward for the rest of your life. I will admit, I would love for these two to be in a relationship, but at this point it is very much only platonic. There is a queer relationship in here between Rune and another member of one of the powerful courts. This does have a lot of queer representation just all throughout it. It's very queer coded. It also has a lot of found family throughout it as Rune starts collecting all these people around him. At this time in his life, at the beginning of this series, he is someone who will be for hire, and one day a man known as the Tower asks him to find his godson because he has been kidnapped, and this kind of opens this door to all these conspiracies and corruption that are occurring within New Atlantis. If you like found family, 10 out of 10 would recommend this. Urban fantasy, found family, queer representation all around. I think that the magic system is very interesting and is really well built up. You don't really get any info dumping throughout this series. I think that very much as Rune is learning more about himself as well as the different courts, that you kind of get to go along with him and learn without feeling like you're reading a textbook or anything like that. I think that this book balances heartwarming situations, humorous situations, sexy situations, and just heartbreaking and horrifying situations, and I just want people to read this series. All right, and the second to last book on this list, we have The King's Men by Nora Savik, and this is the third book in the Foxhole Court series, or the All for the Game series. Foxhole Court is book number 1. The third book is my favorite just because that is where the romantic relationship kind of comes to fruition. I feel like if you've heard about this series, you know who the relationship is between. If you don't want to know, you may just want to skip this entire review because it's my favorite part of the story, so I'm going to be talking about it. But first, in this book, we are following Neil Jostin, and he is the son of a serial killer known as the Butcher, and he and his mother have been on the run for the last 8 years. Unfortunately for them, one of his father's men catch up with them in Seattle, and while they're able to escape him, by the time they get to the California coast, it is clear that his mother is too injured and ends up passing away, and he is on his own. He ends up making his way to the closest high school and just ends up squatting in a house and joining their Exie team. Exie is a made-up sport. I would say that it's kind of hockey meets lacrosse meets soccer, and he joins this team, and against his knowledge, his coach ends up sending a video of him to Palmetto University, and this is a university that has a Exie team known as the Foxes. So the coach of this team ends up showing up and offering Neil a spot on the team. Neil is not interested. The Foxes happen to have a new player known as Kevin Day, and Kevin Day used to be part of the Ravens. The Ravens, who have a connection to Neil's father. Kevin Day and Rico, the head of this team, used to be best friends, but one day Kevin injured his hand at a skiing trip and decided to leave the team. This means that these two teams have a huge spotlight on them right now. The Foxes have always had a bit of a spotlight on them because they're made up of screw-ups. Past drug addicts, kids that don't have homes, they are the stray dogs of the world. And Neil doesn't want his father to know where he is, and if he steps into the spotlight, his father will very much know where he is. However, Kevin and his sidekick, Andrew, or really Andrew and his sidekick, Kevin, don't really give Neil a choice. So Neil ends up joining this team. He shows up there. He's like, okay, you know what? I'm here. I got 1 year to live. I'm assuming my dad will get out of jail. He'll kill me. It's game over. I'm going to try and fix this team. I'm going to protect Kevin from the Ravens, which seem to be connected to the mob somehow. And I am going to bring us to the championships. This is gay chaos. I don't know how else to describe this book. This is one of those books, either you love it or you just don't. I don't really think that there's an in-between. I don't know how anyone could feel meh about this book. This is definitely a toxic book. There are a lot of toxic people in here. There's a lot of things that happen in here where if anyone that you knew did that in real life, you would be like, ding, 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 911. And there are definitely triggers that you want to check up in this story. I would consider it a new adult story. My favorite part of the story is Neil and Andrew's relationship, which slowly develops and turns into something more in this third book. Not to sound like a total psycho, but when I tell you I think about Neil and Andrew every day. Every day. I am so obsessed with this relationship. There is something about it. Both of these boys have gone through so much trauma. I'm not even joking. Like, the amount of trauma, I wouldn't be here. I'm not even joking. I wouldn't be here. And the fact that they found a safe space in each other is just so incredible. 10 out of 10. They deserve each other. They deserve to have this kind of weird relationship that they have. Overall, I love all the characters, even if I don't especially like them. They are all very flawed and they all play their role in this story and in Neil's development as he turns from a kid on the run to someone who has something really to fight for. If you're looking for a chaotic story that is part sports romance, part mafia situation, check this out. Check this out. I really I think about it every day. I really do. I think about this all the time. All right, guys, and we are on to book number 1. I kind of was thinking about it and I was like, if someone put a gun to my head, what would I say is the best book of the year? And I would have to go with The Death of Eva Ooshi by Akwaeke Emezi. This is just one of those books that punched me so hard in the face when it came to emotional impact that I had to give it the number one spot. I mean, it threatened me, it threatened my family. And this is a story where we are following different characters. And once again, I would say it's very similar to Everything I Never Told You. In fact, I think I did if you like this book, then read this book, and use those 2 books as an example, where we are following people before and after the death of a specific character. In this case, Viva Ooshi. He is found on the front porch of his mother's house. He has been wrapped in a cloth and he is very much dead, and she is trying to figure out why is her son dead? Why is he wearing nothing but this cloth? Like, who brought him here? Who would disrespect him to steal his clothing, yet at the same time caringly wrap him up and place him gently at his mother's front door? That doesn't make any sense. And so she kind of sets out and talks to his friends and his family members, and maybe starts to realize that her son wasn't exactly who she thought he was. This story is definitely a tearjerker. I felt like I was on the verge of tears on every single page of this book, and as soon as I flipped to the last chapter and saw who was narrating that last chapter, I just bawled. I'm not even kidding. The last chapter was maybe 2 pages long and I really struggled to read it because I was just in tears the entire time. So I was like trying to read it through my tears and it just wasn't happening. And I probably looked and sounded like I do right now as I'm struggling with my cold or my allergies or whatever is happening, but I was an absolute mess after reading this book. I think that it had a really interesting relationship in it. I don't really want to talk about it because it's not mentioned in the synopsis, but it was like one of those taboo relationships where you're like, I definitely shouldn't be supporting this, but I am. And I just thought that it was really well written. I thought that Vivek's relationship with his friends was just really beautiful and heartwarming, and I just thought that he was such an interesting character. He was such an interesting person that had so many unusual things about him and was just really fun to learn more about him. This book very much had a queer aspect to it, and I think that you very much see how dangerous it is for someone queer to exist in a world where that is not accepted, and that it's not just the people that are homophobic that are a danger to him, but also to those who are so desperately trying to protect him that in the end they also end up doing some harm on top of that because of their fear and paranoia of losing him to a society that thinks that he should not exist. And I think that it was just so beautifully written. Akwaeke Emezi really knows how to pack a punch in such a short story. I did recommend this book to a family member and they said that they were reading it for their book club, and I'm just so excited that more people are picking up this book. I would definitely say that if you're looking to up your diversity game when it comes to reading, you should definitely check out this book. Not only is this set in Nigeria following a queer character, but it is also written by a Black non-binary author. So it's got a lot going for it. I'm definitely looking forward to reading more books by this author because they really know how to take your heart out and kind of stomp on it and maybe like kick it into the sun. But yes, please, please, if you haven't read this book, do so. All right, guys, so those are my 10 top books as well as some honorable mentions. I would love to know if you read and loved any of these, or if they're on your TBR, and if you are now more excited than ever to get to them. I would also love to know what some of your favorite books of 2023 were. As always, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!